you try not to offend people? It's natural if you do. Most of us don't want to hurt people's feelings. So let me ask the audience something. This man there, he's our next guest. So would you call him, raise your hand, would you call him an African American? Okay, many people use that phrase. Whatever you call him, his name is DeRoy Murdoch. He's a Scripps Howard columnist. And DeRoy, I'm told the politically correct way to describe black people these days is African American. But when people call you that, what's your reaction?
John, I correct them immediately. And what I say is I'm an American, I happen to be black, but I'm not an African American. I was born in Los Angeles, California, not Lagos, Nigeria, or Kenya, or anything like that. I describe myself as American. I'm proud to be American. I may have a better tan than you, John, but I'm as American as you are.
But what's wrong with the term? You know, maybe your parents were from Costa Rica, but presumably originally they were from Africa. Some people say this is better, African American.
Well, obviously my ancestors didn't come from Sweden or Norway. You can probably tell that by looking at me. But look, I think it's not a good thing for us Americans to divide ourselves up in all these different categories. This is a very ethnically diverse country, but if we don't have some unifying identity as Americans, I think we just end up squabbling and balkanizing ourselves, and I don't think that's a healthy thing. I don't think Dr. Martin Luther King conducted his fight for civil rights so that we Americans could go off and sort of be in our own little corner.
Hear, hear.
And a Gallup poll did find that most black people don't care either way, and 13% said they preferred black, 61% said it didn't matter, and yet so many white people feel they just have to use this term.
Yeah, I do see people sometimes on the air when they introduce me or whatever, they'll say I'm an African American. I say no, I'm not, and have to go through that whole. I do correct them. I correct them immediately.
Tiresome.
And you see them sort of squirming and not knowing what to do, and they don't want to make me uncomfortable, so they call me African American, and they succeed to make me feel uncomfortable. So it gets to be very, very difficult if you're a white person to know exactly what to say.
Well, I do think African American is a very misleading term, so let me again ask the audience something. How many of you here are African American? All right, so now you're from Africa, I know you, and why do you call you're white and to be, well, go ahead.
Well, my dad's South African, and I spend 3 months every year there. My dad has applied for South African citizenship, and I consider myself part African.
So how is that descriptive of anything? DeRoy, you can't see him because you're in another place, but he is actually a relative of mine. But he does call himself, his whole family, they call themselves African Americans.
There have been a number of cases where people have been in this country, applied for law school, medical school, and filled out on their applications, ticked off the box that said African American. And then they showed up for class the first day, and everyone was very startled to see a white person walk into the room. I believe in one instance, a medical student, if I'm not wrong, insisted on a white, I believe South African, if I'm not wrong, insisted on calling himself an African American. And the school responded by saying that if he continued, he would have to go into psychological counseling about this and actually suspended him from school. So this is just a horrible, horrible thing. And again, we put ourselves in all these silly categories, and we really should just focus on being Americans. I think that's the most important thing of all.
And if you have to use a descriptor, I would think white and black is the more accurate term, and yet so many Americans are reluctant to use the term black. Even in television, where time is short, we count every second. Even the often politically incorrect Fox anchors often use the 7-syllable word when a 1-syllable word will do.
We've just elected our first African-American president.
Or an African-American.
One is an African-American, okay?
Right. Here you have an African-American candidate in Florida.
Now, DeRoy, what do you make of that? They're such tough guys. They say they're not being politically correct.
Yeah, it's really quite silly. There was an instance where I believe it was a CNN anchor or a correspondent referred to Nelson Mandela as a great African-American leader. I thought that was kind of funny. And the other thing is, why is it we refer to blacks as African Americans? We don't call whites European Americans.
I think this started in the late 80s. Jesse Jackson said, Black tells you about skin color and what side of town you live on. African American evokes discussion of the world. Sounds better.
Yeah, I first heard the term for African American in the late 80s. Jesse Jackson started using it, and you almost could hear the entire press corps saying, now they're called African Americans. I don't remember there ever being a vote where black Americans were asked, given the opportunity to vote on this. All of a sudden, we're not Americans, we're African Americans. And this is all basically something that Jesse Jackson started, as best I can tell.
It's like he was king, and we're all his subjects. Whatever he says, we do. I guess we don't do it anymore, but at the time, people were really tiptoeing around.
Oh, yeah. Well, I think the tiptoeing kind of continues.
And one American president has said there is no room in this country for hyphenated Americanism. A hyphenated American is not an American at all. You know about that?
Yeah, that was a quote from Teddy Roosevelt. I think he was absolutely correct about that. And the more hyphens we put in, it just creates more reasons for us to squabble among ourselves and find reasons to disagree as opposed to agree on things.
Well, thank you, DeRoy Murdoch. Up next,
thank you, John.
and thank you, Jacob Berman. Up next, she's been called the most loathsome person in America. Heartless, vicious, mean-spirited. Ann Coulter joins us next. Is her speech as evil as they say?